Flickers in the Dark Episode 41, Whispers of the Lullaby. As I sank into the worn-out leather armchair, I pondered over my husband's proposition. A private nurse? Really? I mused, toying with the edge of the fraying cushion. He nodded enthusiastically.
Yeah, one of my regulars, Mr. Keaton, mentioned that his elderly mother requires round-the-clock care. She's been living with him ever since she fell and fractured her hip. She's a tad eccentric, but he pays well.
The promise of a stable income was tempting, but the idea of caring for a stranger, in a stranger's house, felt unsettling. However, with each passing day of unemployment, the weight on my shoulders grew. I agreed to at least meet Mr. Keaton and his mother. The Keaton residence was a sprawling manor, eerily reminiscent of the haunted houses one sees in Gothic horror tales. As I approached, I noticed the windows were tightly shut, the curtains drawn, blocking any glimpse of life inside. Mr. Keaton welcomed me with a nervous smile, his demeanor contrasting starkly with his robust physique.
Ah! Lila, right? He greeted, extending a sweaty hand. Thank you for coming. My mother's been eagerly waiting.
Inside, the house smelled of mildew and old books. The hallway was lined with faded portraits of people who I assumed were the Keaton ancestors. But it was the recurrent sound of soft humming that caught my attention. The melancholic tune echoed from the end of the corridor, beckoning me. In a dimly lit room, I found an elderly woman, Mrs. Keaton, seated by the window, her wispy white hair cascading down her back. As I approached, her humming grew louder. The tune felt eerily familiar, like a forgotten lullaby.
You must be Lila,
she croaked, her eyes never leaving the window. Yes, Mrs. Keaton, I replied gently. Your son mentioned you needed some assistance. The old woman chuckled, a mischievous glint in her eyes.
Not just assistance, my dear. I need someone to listen.
The next few days fell into a rhythm. I administered her medication, helped with her physical therapy, and listened to her tales of youth. But it wasn't just her stories that kept me intrigued. Every night, Mrs. Keaton would hum the same haunting lullaby. I'd lie awake in the guest room, that tune echoing in the dark. One night, driven by curiosity, I tiptoed to her room. The door was slightly ajar, and I watched as she hummed, not to herself, but to the numerous portraits adorning her walls. Each face seemed to come alive, mouthing words in sync with her tune. Startled, I backed away, colliding with a small table. As a vase shattered, the room fell silent. I could feel Mrs. Keaton's piercing gaze on me.
You saw them, didn't you? My ancestors. They come alive with the lullaby. It's a Keaton family secret.
I was horrified. But Mrs. Keaton seemed almost relieved to have shared her secret. The next day, she handed me an old diary.
This belonged to my great-grandmother, she whispered. It has the lyrics of the lullaby. It's a bridge between our world and theirs.
Over the next few days, I read the diary and learned the lullaby's origin. Passed down through generations, it was a way for the Keatons to connect with their ancestors, to seek guidance, and sometimes, to bid a final goodbye. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Mrs. Keaton beckoned me to her side.
Tonight, Lila, she murmured, I want to see my husband one last time.
With trepidation, I began to hum the lullaby. The portraits shimmered to life, and for the first time, I saw a younger Mrs. Keaton with a kind-faced man, presumably her late husband. They exchanged words, smiles, and tears. Then, as the lullaby ended, Mrs. Keaton's frail body grew still. The storm subsided. Mr. Keaton, having witnessed everything, nodded at me, tears glistening in his eyes.
Thank you, he whispered.
I left the Keaton manor with the diary in hand, a heavy heart, and an understanding of the bond between life and death. The lullaby would forever echo in my memories, a haunting reminder of my time with the Keatons.